So it will cover up through marketing ethics, not marketing research. So on Thursday, we will not have class. You will have that time to take the exam. The exam will be on D2L, and you can take it whenever you want. It will be open by class time on Thursday. Probably not before, because I write them. I have a tendency to put things off. I'm a lawyer, so I procrastinate and put things off. And so it'll probably be available on Thursday right at class time. So you'll have class time. You don't have to come to class because it will be on D2L. I'm doing that because that just makes it easier in case we have people that have tested positive for COVID or whatever. You can use whatever resources you want. There may be an essay on the exam which will require you to cite if there is. So I'm not saying there will be, but if there is, it will require your citation. So that's why it's open note, open book, open neighbor. Nobody, when I went to law school, you know, they have these closed book exams, and a client has ever asked me to, you know, give them advice and not look at any of the books on my shelves or consult, you know, the legal online resources. So today's lecture is on ethics. It is my favorite topic to cover and the one that students like the least. And go back. Here. That. So let's see what we're doing. Switch screens. All right, so I think I've got everything here. Some of you wanted the reading list. This is a good time to ask again if you want the reading list, because we're going to talk about some of the books that are on this reading list. I run out of copies. See me, I'll keep one in case I run out. And you guys can just follow me down to the copier, and I'll make some more copies at the end of class. So we're going to start with a question, my critical thinking challenge for the day. What is justice? And what does justice have to do with marketing? So what do you all think? What is justice? And what does it have to do with marketing? You want to take the first question or the second? You raised your hand first.
I guess we could do the first one.
Okay, what is justice?
So justice is like just, I guess, following laws, and if you don't follow those laws,
Following
you're
laws.
punished.
Okay, so we'll put that up here. Laws. So we have this idea. It's called, for example, at the federal level, the Department of Justice, right? The agency that enforces federal criminal law. You had your hand up next. Which one do you want to answer?
I guess the first one.
Okay.
Like doing the right thing, like.
Okay. So it has something to do with rights. Wrong, I guess. What else? Anything else?
Like good and bad, and like that's why I see like good and bad and like evil and stuff.
Okay. Good, bad. Evil, avoiding evil. All right, I think you had your hand up first.
I guess having to pay for something that's been done wrong, or like trying to make something that has
Okay.
been done wrong, right?
All right, so that's what we call distributive justice. That's the desserts theory. That's what we call giving people their just desserts. Theory of justice. Yeah.
I think it's enforcing the law and
Enforcement. Okay. All right.
I think that's what your heart tell you to do.
What?
Your heart tell you to do.
So it's emotional.
Yeah.
Heart. There. You had your hand up.
Consequences that fit the actions, consequences that fit the action.
Okay. So That goes along with her idea of distributive justice, which we can call proportionality. Right? Like the idea that there should be a proportional outcome to something. If somebody steals, for example, from a business, is it proportional to cut off their hand? We used to think that. That used to be the law. If you stole, you got your hand cut off. Is there anybody else on this side that had their hand up? You did that. Go ahead.
It's more like respect of the law.
It's what?
Respect of the law.
Okay, so we have the law and you're saying respect. So following the law. All right, we'll go down this aisle.
Being treated
Did I give you-
equally and fairly.
Okay, equality. And fairness. Now these are somewhat difficult because they're about as abstract as justice itself. I could treat you all exactly equally and you wouldn't like it and you wouldn't think it's just. I could give everybody in here an F. That's equality of results, isn't it? I'll give everybody an F. We can all just go home. My colleagues will love me because I'll be seen as, like a strong upholder of academic values. So is that justice, equality of results? Maybe equality of opportunity? So you all have the same access, you'll get the same exam, but it depends on how much you put into it. Anybody else in this column here? Any ideas? Okay, we'll go to this column. Who had their hand up over here?
I think just there is a correct recognition.
Correct. Okay. Correctness. All right. Okay, so we've got some good ideas here about what justice is. Now, what does it have to do with marketing? We've got some things that have to do, we've got a lot of ideas here about the law, about right and wrong. There are lots of things that I can do to you that may not be illegal. And they may be wrong. Let's suppose I see you're going into a business to apply for a job. And, after you leave, I tell the manager, I'm a college professor at the University of Central Oklahoma. And I have Mr. or Ms. So-and-so in my class. And if I were you, I wouldn't hire them because they're dumb as the day is long. Every time they open their mouth, they subtract from the sum total of human knowledge. If they got any simpler, we'd have to take them out and water them like a potted palm. Is that illegal? No. Can you sue me for it? It's actually not. I've not said anything that's not an opinion there. If I had said, you're a known felon, then maybe you could sue me. If it's true that you're not, truth is a defense. But if I said something like you're a known felon, well, then that's something that we can work with. When Socrates asks this question, what is justice? He means it in the broadest sense of the word, not just about the law, right? The law is important, but he means it about how we interact in everyday situations, things that are not necessarily covered by the law. So the law is important when we think about justice. So we have the law, and then we have justice or ethics. Socrates called it justice. His question was what is the just life? What is the good life? And where they overlap, we have some things that are similar there, but the law deals with lots of things that are not necessarily right or wrong or moral, have any moral import. I used to teach a course called The Law of Commercial Transactions, and in that course, we talk about the UCC. And the UCC has all of these, what we call gap fillers, which is if you don't state differently in a contract for the sale of goods over $500, this is the way it will operate. For example, who's going to bear the risk of loss in a contract? If you don't state it, once a business places the goods in the hands of the customer, of a common carrier, and ships them to the customer, the risk of loss is passed. There's nothing moral or immoral about that. You can change it. The UCC says you're welcome to change that. But if you don't, the risk of loss passes. So when you order stuff from eBay or you order from Amazon, and Amazon puts that good into, unless the contract says something different, unless you read the contract, you've borne the risk of loss. And if the goods are damaged in transit and they show up and they arrive, it just sucks to be you. That's just the way the law works. That's not moral or immoral. It's just the law, right? It has nothing to do with morality. But justice for Socrates means something more. It's not just about the law. It's about all of these things. So justice has an impact in marketing. We want our fundamental actions with regard to other parties to have some ethics, some sense of justice to them, some sense of proportionality. And so in the broadest sense, when we think about justice not just as the law, when we think about the idealized version of justice in the realm of the forms, which Socrates talks about in a book called Republic, which I think is on the reading list that I gave you, that some of you wanted. It's this absolute perfected idea of it. In every situation, what is going to be the best result, the best outcome, the absolute sense of justice? Can we achieve that? It's kind of difficult. Why should we study philosophy in a class like this? Well, the highest degree, the degree that I hold, I have 2 doctoral degrees. I have a Doctor of Jurisprudence, and then I have a PhD. PhD stands for what? Doctor of Philosophy. That's right. It stands for Doctor of Philosophy. You don't actually take a whole lot of philosophy courses in a marketing PhD program. What you take is you take courses on, consumer behavior and marketing theory, things like that. Why do we have that? Well, because as an activity, that's engaging in philosophical thought about the discipline from a more abstract perspective, not just from a concrete perspective. So it's the highest degree that you can get as the PhD. As an activity, it forces us to focus our thoughts. And so it's worthy of study. And it answers 3 great questions that are relevant to us in the study of marketing, and that are relevant to all people in all societies and all academic disciplines at all times. Those 3 questions are the question of knowledge. What is it I can know, and how can I know it? Now, this is really important for marketers, because when we ask questions of people on surveys where we want to find out what their preferences are, which we'll talk about in marketing research on a week from today, on Tuesday, we want to know that when we're asking that question, that we have the same idea of what we're asking. It turns out that this is not as simple as you might think it is. So for the sake of social distancing, I won't come over here and touch the table where you're sitting, but what is this? Well, I told you what it is. I said what is it? I said it's a table. Why is this a table? What makes it a table?
Laptop with legs.
It's a flat top with legs. Why isn't it a desk?
It could be drawers.
It doesn't, so all desks have drawers. You think so? Not sure?
That's what I think of the desk as.
A desk has, all desks have drawers. And no tables have drawers. You guess, you're not sure? What makes it a table?
In a classroom?
It's,
Your experience.
what's your, you had your hand up
That's
next.
what society says it is.
It's what, so it's all a societal construct. Well, what is this? Why isn't it a desk? It's got, well, it's got shelves. It doesn't have, they used to have ones in here that had drawers. It's a tall tabletop with a slanty thing.
It's a fancy table.
Yeah, you had your hand up next, I think.
Table is like meant for more than one person, a desk is meant for one.
What about partners' desks? You ever seen a partner's desk? They used to be very popular. They were meant for partners. In a law firm, for example, you know, space used to be, I mean, people didn't just build huge buildings. It took a long time to build stuff. You know, they construct all kinds of things really quickly now. And we can throw up these buildings and throw up these apartments and things like that. That took less than a year to construct the transformative learning quad. I don't even know what that means. The Center for Transformative Cheating across the way, right? People used to have, you know, buildings in Guthrie where they had a law office with their partner. You had these partners' desks where two people could sit. They both had legs and they had drawers on both sides. So desks are only made for one people or one person? Typically. You see what I'm getting at? It's not as easy as we think it is to necessarily idea. Maybe it's the purpose to which it's put. If I sit on it, does it become a chair? It becomes a bench. Okay. All right. So what is it we can know and how can we know it? There are two subfields of philosophy that deal with this. Epistemology deals with how we can actually know things, and metaphysics deals with the study of reality. The second question is the issue of conduct. What is moral philosophy? How should we behave? What makes something in marketing acceptable? Should we be able to advertise direct consumer pharmaceutical products? We're one of only two nations that allows that, for people to advertise their drugs. There are all these advertisements out there for, if you're feeling depressed, try Abilify. Add it to your current antidepressant regime. You list the side effects, right? So should we be able to do that? Other countries say no. Other countries don't let you do this. The only other country that allows this is New Zealand. And then the third great question of philosophy is governance, which obviously deals in marketing. How are we going to govern our relationships? Not just governance in the sense of government, but how are we going to conduct ourselves in the course of business? How are we going to know that we can trust that contracts will be honored and carried out and executed? So these are the three great questions, and they apply to all disciplines. The question of knowledge, the question of conduct, and the question of governance. How is it that we know, when we talk about governance, we mean a broad sense of it, as in what are the laws of physics? That's a legal term, but we're applying it to a scientific discipline. It's the governance of the universe, right? So these three great broad questions. And a lot is writing on these questions. So there are some challenges to the study of ethics. And they are attractive, or at least two of them are attractive. The third one doesn't seem attractive, but it's the hardest to deal with. So what are these challenges? Subjectivism. This is the belief that there are no a priori truths when it comes to things like ethics. A priori means there is no knowledge that we can know for certain, absent a context with regard to things like ethics. So for the subjectivist, nothing can ever be absolutely right or wrong. Somebody talked about emotional. They would say ethics is all emotional, that it's how I feel. If it gives you that sticky feeling in your gut, that's ethics. And that's different for everybody. What one person can tolerate, somebody else may find abhorrent, right? This seems attractive, but if we accept it, what's the problem? Well, we could never really come together and form any kind of society. If we just said, it's all up to the individual to decide how things are gonna go. Well, this is going back to what Hobbes described in a book called Leviathan as the primitive psyche, the war of all against all. There was a time when that we know from the anthropological and archaeological record that this time did exist, a time before government, a time before society, when man, lived in small groups, familial, tribes, basically. It was, in Hobbes's word, solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. That would be the subjectivist world. It's attractive because it seems like that. There don't seem to be proofs in ethics like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, which is the Pythagorean theorem. If you have a rectilinear triangle, and one side is 3, the other side is 4, the third side has to be 5. You said that? 5, right? There don't seem to be those kinds of proofs in ethics. But maybe there are. The second one is cultural relativism. Cultural relativism says that it's not, and this one is very attractive to businesses because it says it's not up to the individual, but rather it's society contextual. So when we go and we do business in foreign nations, if they accept bribery and things like that, we should just accept that. That's the cost of doing business. Well, in the United States, we have something called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits American businesses from doing that, from engaging, from bribing officials. But in lots of parts of the world, that's the way they do business. What can we say to the cultural relativists? I think what we can say is that although that is what's occurring, and this is what Socrates says in Republic, because that's what's occurring doesn't make it right. And it doesn't mean that the people in those societies where corruption is going on want it to be that way. It just is the way. That's not the business of the philosopher to tell you what's going on. That's the business of the cultural anthropologist to tell you what's going on, or the sociologist, right? The business of the philosopher is to tell you what the highest can be. And the fact that people accept something in their society because it's widespread doesn't mean that that's the best that it can be. Now, the third one is the hardest one. This is what we call a deterministic theory of ethics, psychological egoism. Psychological egoism says, although we think we have free will, we really don't. Either as a result of nature, nurture, or a combination of the two, everything that we do is sort of predetermined, how we will behave. Let's try an experiment. I'm going to offend geneticists out there by simplifying things. What makes a male from a genetic standpoint, a human male? Yes.
XX chromosome,
No.
XY chromosome.
It's the Y chromosome, right? The Y chromosome. That gives us, the genetic characteristics of being a male. So everyone with a Y chromosome, I want you to raise your hand. Everyone who has a Y chromosome, raise your hand. Okay. All of the men in here raise their hand. You thought you had free will, but maybe you didn't. Why did you raise your hand? I don't know. Society tells you to do this. Society tells you to do what the teacher says to do. You learned that from kindergarten, right? do what the teacher says. People might look at you if you don't do it, you know, are you questioning? Not sure? So psychological egoism says that we really can't help but react the way we react to things. What's the problem with this? Well, what psychological egoism does is it's what we call an absolutist and deterministic philosophy, in that everything seems to justify the answers to the question. And it becomes what we call in logic a problem with circular reasoning. You're defining the solution by the problem itself. The other problem with psychological egoism is it doesn't take into account that people are often very conflicted in the choices that they have to make. Think about the last election. I don't think anybody was thrilled with either of the candidates. Well, I think they're the Trump supporters. There's 45% of the population that seems to just absolutely love Donald Trump. But most people, the vast majority of the country, more than half, 55%, I think, held their nose and voted for the lesser of two evils, what they viewed as being the lesser of two evils. Psychological doesn't have an answer for how we deal with those kinds of things. In business, how do we deal with when we have the potential of making money, but maybe making more money later on? How do we deal with those? It can be very conflicting, right? And psychological egoism doesn't tell us how to do that. So there are problems with it. So subjectivism says the self is all one knows. There are no objective truths, rejection of a priori knowledge, and it's intuitively appealing because we see this in real life, that these are very tough questions. This case, Griswold versus Connecticut, was the first case that established a right to privacy, and it dealt with contraception. In Connecticut, it was illegal to use, promote, sell, or possess contraceptive devices. And the court in that said that in the penumbras and emanations of the Constitution, there's this right to privacy. And that became very controversial because Griswold becomes the father case for a case that comes later in 1973 called Roe versus Wade, which is highly debated, right? Should we be able to market abortion services? Well, if we went around the room, there are 42 people in here, there would probably be 42 different opinions about that. So it seems intuitively appealing, but you have to remember that there are hard questions even in physics, and there are questions that are not answered, right? And so just because it's a hard question doesn't mean that we can't go through it logically. Cultural relativism, again, there are no a priori truths, but we have societies and groups that we can look to, and it leads to problems in international business cases. Psychological egoism I talked about, which is deterministic, solipsistic, and it relies on nature and nurture, or a combination of the two, to determine all outcomes with absolute certainty. It says we will always act in our own self-interest. Well, you see people that actually don't act in their own self-interest all the time. Mothers will protect their child, right? Even to the extent of giving up their own lives. The psychological egoist would just say, well, that's what they really wanted to do because it made them feel good. Well, that engages again in circular reasoning. All right, so problems with the challenges to ethics. The problems with the challenges are they are emotive, so they rely on emotion. So we can cross this one off. We can't use emotion when we're dealing with ethics and justice. We're going to have to be non-emotive. They're not rational, and they allow for exceptionalism. They allow for me to say, I'm exceptional, or my group is exceptional. And therefore, we can engage in these kinds of behaviors. The ultimate example of this is, in terms of a group doing this, would be the fascistic society in Nazi Germany and Italy under Benito Mussolini that rounded up and exterminated, millions of Jews and gypsies and homosexuals and people of other, varying attributes that they found to be problematic. And I think we can all say, looking back on that, that was a priori wrong, right? There's a problem with that. We can't have that kind of exceptionalism. So what are the valid ethical theories? Well, they're based on reason, they're not emotive, and they don't allow for exceptionalism. So in order to be a valid ethical theory, you have to be based on reason, not emotive, not allow for exceptionalism. That doesn't mean there aren't problems with the valid ethical theories. It just means that they meet these minimum criteria. Is the bulb going out in that?
Keeps getting lower.
It keeps getting dimmer and dimmer. Let me try turning off the front light. Does that make it a little better?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're not emotive. They don't allow for exceptions. They're based on reason. So what are the theories? Well, we start with Plato's Republic, in which he asks the question, what is justice? And he goes through a whole thing and he comes up with the ideal form of society. He says, well, sometimes it's easier to see things if we look at them in the large scale as opposed to small scale cases, and we can see things more clearly. And so he imagines what is just for a society, and that's what he comes up with, which is Plato's Republic. Right? And I will tell you that as a political scientist, I was, when I used to teach in the Department of Political Science, I was a small r Platonic Republican, which is a form of government in which you have elements of monarchy, elements of aristocracy, and elements of polity, which is what we sort of have in the United States. Then there are the teleological theories, which are utilitarianism, the deontological theory, which is absolutism, and then virtue ethics, which is developed by Aristotle, who was Plato's most famous student. We know about Socrates from his most famous student, Plato, and from the poet Xenophon. Just as Socrates had this student, he didn't write anything down. Plato says he wrote what Socrates said down. But he would never have gotten tenure at a college today because he didn't actually do any sort of like academic research. It was all Plato that took down these notes and published them. The trial and death in Socrates, and so we talk about the Platonic dialogues. As Socrates had Plato as his most famous student, Plato had a very famous student, which was Aristotle, who developed virtue ethics. So these three models of ethics all approach it from a slightly different perspective, but they all meet the three criterion of being rational, universally applicable, based on non-emotive reasoning. So teleological ethics, this is the one that business students like the most. It's called the greatest happiness principle, or the maximization of utility. And it takes two forms, act and rule. Act utilitarianism says that in every interaction, what I should do is I should figure out what's going to create the greatest happiness for all of the people involved, and then pursue that outcome. So in business and transactions, what we should do is we should figure out if the goods we're selling are going to maximize the overall happiness of everybody, right? That becomes really hard to do, doesn't it? Because we have to think about not just who we're selling it to, but what? What happens with this bottle? I'm actually reusing this bottle. I bought the Dasani and then I filled it up with the water bottle dispensing feature on the water fountain out there. So I'm reusing this. But what kinds of ethical issues beyond my purchasing this, how could this impact you, the purchase of this product? Okay? We've got lots of plastics out there that are polluting the environment. Right? There's also evidence to suggest that if you leave this in the sun, that the chemicals of the plastic begin to break down, and that drinking water that's got these chemicals that have been released into it can cause cancer. And ultimately, that affects everybody, doesn't it? Because our rates of insurance go up. If we have more rates of cancer, insurance spreads risk among the population. It means that everybody's going to pay more for insurance. So we have to think about everything. That becomes overly complex and very difficult to do for most people. So we come up with a second form, which is rule utilitarianism, which says, look, what we'll do is we'll establish rules, and if we follow the rules, those should lead to, in the aggregate, the greatest outcome for the greatest number of people. Now, what is wrong with this theory? What are some of the challenges to this theory? Well, you end up with the means justification kinds of arguments. And so I used to play a video that's no longer available on CNN called The Bitter Truth Behind the Chocolate in Your Candy Bars. And this is an excellent example of how justice applies to marketing. Most of the world's chocolate is produced, yes.
I've actually seen that documentary.
The Bitter Truth? Yeah. I mean, it was a really good video, and it's no longer, for years and years and years, it was available, and I would play it. It was about 20 minutes long. And students didn't know this. They didn't realize that the chocolate in their candy bars was made with slave labor. A very small percentage of the world that's engaged in cocoa production is enslaved, basically, on the west coast of Africa, and we all get chocolate. And isn't that great? Both ACT and rule utilitarianism would say that you could justify that. ACT utilitarianism, because a very small percentage of the people are enslaved to make this product. Now you can find ethically sourced chocolate. How do you do that? You look for Free Trade Alliance, or UTS, Good Inside, on the label to see if it's been produced someplace that it's not engaged in slave labor. But a very small percentage of the world is enslaved under this, and we all end up with chocolate. And isn't that wonderful? And chocolate has been shown to be good for your heart. That doesn't mean you should go out and eat lots of it. And by the way, it's not the milk chocolate that we have in the United States. You have to eat the dark chocolate, which none of the Americans seem to like because it's bitter, which is why they call it the bitter truth, the truth behind the world's chocolate. That's problematic. Most of us say, I don't think I really want to do that. I don't think I really agree with that. But both you could come up with rules and under ACT utilitarianism, justifications for this kind of behavior. And I think most of us say, but again, this is universally applicable. It doesn't rely on emotive thinking, and you can justify it. Doesn't allow for exceptionalism. In response to that, we have deontological ethics, which is on the other end of the spectrum, which says you can't look at results at all. Results are not at all important in ethics. We have to look at, now I think the bulb has gotten brighter again, hasn't it? It's not just the fact that the lights are off, it's gotten brighter, or is it my imagination? I'm gonna have to report that. So deontological ethics, we can have two types. There's religious absolutism and rational absolutism, which was developed by Kant in what he calls the categorical imperative. There are three great works that Kant came up with: the critique of pure reason, the critique of practical reason, and the metaphysics of morals. You have to discern, according to Kant, duties a priori. So in the Critique of Practical Reason, he says there are what we call hypothetical imperatives. Hypothetical imperatives are those things that exist because we want something. If you want to have a shot at a better job, you should go to college. If you want to have a shot at getting, it used to be that college was a guarantee of middle class status. It's no longer that guarantee. But I can guarantee you that if you don't go to college, you're going to have to do something else, some kind of education to achieve middle class status, right? That doesn't mean that there aren't jobs out there. Historically, those jobs have not been middle class jobs, and they've not been viewed as middle class. But as they have become more in demand, things like plumbers and electricians, plumbers make a lot of money. The guy who's my plumber, makes probably $300,000 to $400,000 a year running a plumbing business. Doesn't have a college education. I'd say he's, solidly in the middle class, right? If you don't go to college, you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to find some way. And most people, it's easier to go to college because, let's face it, the reason that plumbers make a lot of money is because it's not a pleasant job. There's an old joke. A brain surgeon, a neurosurgeon calls a plumber because his toilet's broken. The plumber comes in, bangs on the toilet for about 5 minutes, and hands the brain surgeon a bill for $1,000. And the brain surgeon says, I'm a neurosurgeon and I don't make $1,000 for 5 minutes worth of work. And the plumber replies, I didn't either when I was a neurosurgeon. These people are scarce and you might need them, right? They can charge a lot of money. So hypothetical imperatives exist because we want something. Categorical imperatives, on the other hand, in the Critique of Pure Reason, exist a priori because there is a moral justification. Now, what does Kant say? Well, the categorical imperative says, and you can't sort of recite the categorical imperative without beginning to sort of laugh after you've had a drink or two, and realize that there may be problems with this theory as well. What is the categorical imperative? In every interaction with another rational being, you must act in such a way as to be able to will that your action would be a universal maxim of law. What does that mean? Always treat another individual, another rational being, as an end in and of themselves and never as a means to an end. Well, what's an example of that? What can you never do if you follow the categorical imperative? Never lie. You can never lie. Even if bad results happen, Kant would say, you can never lie. Brutal honesty. It's the reason I'm divorced, because I am a follower of Kant. I believe in brutal honesty. My spouse would come in and say, how do I look in this? And I would say, Robin, pastels make you look like death warmed over. Go back upstairs and change. I won't go out with you in that outfit. You're a winter. Not a summer. The complexion just doesn't handle that. Brutal honesty. Never lie. Never lie in business. Kant would say no. You all have seen a movie called Pretty Woman. It's an old movie now. What does Richard Gere do in that movie? He bluffs. He bluffs the old guy that he's trying to take over his company, right? And at the end, he bluffs about being able to stop his shipping contracts for building ships for the Navy. At the end, the old guy says, what about my shipping contracts? He says, they weren't dead, they were just delayed. He said, you were bluffing? And Richard Gere says, yeah, I was bluffing. He says, well, you're very good at it. And Richard Gere says, it's my job. Never bluff in business? I don't know. Never lie? Tell your wife like I did, you look like hell in that outfit. You look bloated and fat and puffy. Go put on something black and slimming. Never lie. Most of us would say that's really hard. The problem with deontological ethics is it allows for no exceptions. And we all know that we should follow the rules, but there may be exceptions. And ultimately, I think if you pin Kant down and said, why are these rules important? He would say, well, because you could never form a society if you don't have these sorts of respects for the rules. Well, doesn't that ultimately mean that results do matter? Right? Isn't that a circular way of getting to results actually do matter? So there's a third theory, and it's actually one of my favorites, which is virtue ethics. It was developed by Aristotle in two books called the Nicomachean Ethics and the Eudemian Ethics, both of which I've read. And Aristotle is all about balance and proportionality. And that's what I like about it. He lists the virtues. So what are the virtues? Well, what we have to do is we have to find the means between extremes. What's an extreme defect of character that we can come up with? Well, the one that comes to mind most easily is the coward. The coward always runs away from a fight. The opposite of cowardice, most of you will say, is courage. That's not true. The opposite of cowardice is what we call heedlessness. This is somebody who's always engaged, in any instance is ready to be engaged in provocation. I had friends like this. One of my friends in high school, he was a little guy, but he was scrappy, and he knew that usually, this is not true with women, by the way, but guys usually, you know, when you see these fight scenes in movies where they're punching and punching and punching, that's not the way fights really happen. Usually the first guy to throw the punch wins the fight in reality. And he knew that. He would take down guys that were far larger than he was, because he was quick to be pissed off. The middle ground between these is courage. Right? The courageous person knows that there's a time when you need to retreat because you can't win, or when to pick your battles carefully. It's these means between extremes. And we could do this for all kinds of things. Aristotle does it in all of his works. You see this in his treatise on politics. Aristotle on politics says there are good governments and bad governments. There are good governments of one, few, and many. There are bad governments of one, few, and a many. And what's the ideal form of government? Well, he actually comes up with that probably the ideal form of government is an aristocracy, because it's a good form of government, but it doesn't have the fatal potentials that the other two have. In a monarchy or a tyranny, which is a bad form of monarchy, you can easily, the good king can easily be led astray. It's one person making all the rules, right? In a democracy, people can easily become swayed by a demagogue. Hitler was popularly elected, by the way, people, to begin with. Donald Trump, by the way, was not popularly elected. He lost popular vote by 4 million votes. Well, because we have this thing called the Electoral College. One. In an aristocracy, you have enough people that maybe you'll have a balance. In friendship, he does this. What can we learn from Aristotle in terms of marketing and friendship? Well, he says there are 3 types of friendships. Nothing wrong with 2 types, but they will end. There's friendship based on utility. These are your work buddies. You work with people, you like them, you know them, And when you get a new job, you probably make new friends and you don't keep the friends from the last job. You think you will, but you don't. The utility ends. You're no longer useful to each other. There's friendship based on pleasure. Aristotle's not priggish. These are your drinking buddies. Right? Nothing wrong with it. But just realize that when they send you to whiskey school, otherwise known as the Betty, or AA, they're going to tell you you have to change your playmates and your playgrounds. That's what they teach you at whiskey school. So I've been told. Means you can't hang out at bars anymore. Right? And the friendships will end. Then there's perfected friendship. Perfected friendship is this balance. You want what's best for the other person. These are the friends that you can count on one hand that will not only be there for you, but they will help you move the body. Right? Very few. You may have 2 or 3 of these in a lifetime. Some things that are arguments or problems with virtue ethics is, how do we determine what the end of a human being is? That's one of the things that Aristotle says we have to do. We have to find the terminus ad quem of a human being. And people are debate about that. I think Aristotle's a clever guy. I think he comes up with a pretty good purpose of what the human being is. He says the purpose of a human being is to live a eudaimonic life. That's ancient Greek for how is it usually translated? It's usually translated as happiness. I don't think that's a good translation. I agree with Sir Daniel Robinson at Oxford, who says that what Aristotle means by the good life is a flourishing life, one that's productive. And Aristotle was an example of this. He was a guy who was studying the cuttlefish and coming up with the taxonomy for the way we classify things into phyla, kingdom, genus, and species. Really, that was predicated on Aristotle's work. But he was also out helping Alexander the Great and giving him advice on campaigns. The second problem that they say is, how do we determine the virtues? I think Aristotle comes up with a pretty good formula for this. And then, even if we agree with these, can we instill these virtues? Well, we have an actual example of this. Benjamin Franklin, our favorite founding father, he's the only one that we know by his nickname, Ben. You don't say Tom Jefferson or Georgie Washington, right? He's the only founding father we know by his nickname. Came up with some 13 virtues. He put them down on a little piece of ivory and he worked on them. He knew that he had leadership capabilities, but he noticed early on that people didn't like some of the things that he did. He led boys into scrapes. He and some friends at one point in time decided they would steal some rocks that were being used to build a house because they could build a little wharf and fish off of it. And he got caught. And he set about reforming himself. He came up with these 13 virtues. Why 13? Because you can get through 4 complete cycles in a year. If you multiply 13 times 4, you come up with what?
52.
52. Who said that? You've already got 2. You can only get 2 for the day. Sorry. And I'll make sure you're next because you've got your hand up several times. So next time, be sure and remind me of that. 52, right? How many weeks are there in a year? 52. That's why historically television series were 13 episodes. You could have a spring lineup, a fall lineup, and then you'd have 2 rerun sets in the summer. So you could go through 4 complete cycles in a year. And he worked on these, and if he had what he called spots, he knew there was more work to do on that one. And he set about reforming himself. He became enormously good at this, successful. He invented all kinds of things. Never took out patents. He wanted them to go into the public domain. Bifocals. Benjamin Franklin invented those. The Franklin stove. The lightning rod, based on his experiments with electricity. Right? So he actually did. And I think his virtues are pretty good. You can look these up if you go to 13virtues.com. Moderation, avoid extremes, forbear resenting injuries as much as you think they deserve. Cleanliness, tolerate no uncleanness in body, clothes, or habitation. Tranquility, be not disruptive or trifle at accidents. and avoidance, chastity. Rarely use venery. That's an old-fashioned word for sex. Venery, but for health or offspring, never to dullness or weakness or the injury of your or another's reputation. I think these are things that we should think about. This is what we call a holistic approach. Deontological ethics and teleological ethics tell us what to do in specific situations. What Aristotle tried to do, and it's worth thinking about, is he tried to give us a way to mold ourselves through the process of habituation into becoming better people. And it's something I think that we should think about as business people. And we see this happening in business. Milton Friedman said, business exists only to make a profit. Any other purpose of business is immoral, according to Friedman. Most businesses don't feel that way today. Lots of businesses have adopted what we think of as being a sustainable model that gives back to the community for the things that they've been given. What are some examples of this? Tom's is one. Bombas, 1 for 1. These are companies that are giving back to the environment that they operate in. I have a meeting with my department chair, so I'm gonna have to let you go early. If you feel cheated, you let me know. If you got ducks, come up and see me. The next time, was there anybody else who I didn't get to today? I know I didn't get to you. Anybody else that I didn't get to today that wanted to participate? I'll give you an opportunity on Tuesday. Again, we won't have class on Thursday because you will be doing what? Working on the exam, which will be on D2L, online. So if you got ducks, come up and see me. Let me turn this off. Okay, what's the last name? So you got 2, so you have 10 before 10 to 20, right? That's correct? Okay. So make sure it doesn't change. What was it? So you got 1, so you got 20, make sure that it doesn't somehow change everything. So when you check it, make sure that it's working, right? Last name? Ross. Cody. You got 1, 2, so you got 15. 18. Good job. You got 2, so you have 15. Thank you. L. You got 2.
Just one.
So you got 10. Sure that doesn't somehow update differently.
TRU, you forgot the details.
Jack? I'm sorry.
I just don't want to interrupt. you
That's fine.
later.
You remind me. You say I want to die. You're welcome to do that. Megan, 1. Okay, John. Before we have 10. Is that the last name? What's your last name?
Lumbala, LUMB.
All right, got it. Yes, sir.
THNH.
This one? And how many did you get?
I got 2. For today is the 1.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right, got it. Thank you. And then last name?
TURR.
T-U. You got 1? All right. make sure it replicates correctly, that it doesn't change. 'Cause sometimes it jumps.
Okay, thank you.
I just had a quick question. Last time we were in class, I asked you about who I should talk to about internships. And you said Professor Gray and Kaiser.
Yes, if you want a sales internship, Bob Kaiser's the one that usually knows about those.
Okay.
Although they all go through Dr. Gray, but he's the one who knows which ones we have available.
Okay. Is there like an office I could go to?
Yeah, we're in Suite 100 right downstairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Because I called both of them. One of them said they couldn't, and then the other never answered or returned.
Which
so-
one did you talk to?
I want to say Kaiser said that